"You'll never survive without us." Those were the last words my father said before I closed the door behind me. Not shouted, not whispered, just calmly spoken like a fact, like the weather. I remember standing there with my suitcase, one small navy suitcase that held everything I owned. A few clothes, my laptop, a notebook filled with written business ideas and hope. Too much hope, maybe. I was 24, gentle by nature, the kind of daughter who said okay, even when it hurt, the kind who believed that love meant loyalty, even when loyalty wasn't returned. Growing up, my family made every decision together, or at least that's what I believed. In reality, decisions were made for me. "You're good with numbers," my mother would say. "Work in your uncle's firm. Family stays together." My father would remind me whenever I mentioned moving out. My older brother was allowed to explore. My younger cousin was encouraged to dream, but my dreams were called risky. My ideas were immature. My independence was disrespect. Still, I stayed. I told myself they were protecting me, that their doubt was just concern in disguise. Then I brought them my plan. It wasn't wild. It wasn't reckless. I had spent 2 years researching small-scale tech services for local businesses. I had clients who were interested. I had a strategy, projections, even a modest savings account. All I needed was space. And maybe belief. We sat around the dining table that evening, the same table where birthdays were celebrated and holidays were planned. I laid out my folder carefully, my hands slightly trembling. "I want to start my own company," I said gently. "I've already been working on it quietly. I think it can grow." There was silence, not thoughtful silence. Dismissive silence. My brother leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You run a company." My mother sighed before even opening the folder. "Why would you struggle like that when you have stability here?" My father didn't even look at the papers. He folded his hands and said, "You're emotional. Business isn't emotional." That sentence stayed with me. "You're emotional?" I tried to explain. I kept my voice calm. I showed them numbers, contracts, emails from potential clients. I explained the demand in the market, but I could feel it. The wall had already gone up. They weren't evaluating my plan. They were evaluating me. "You don't understand how hard the world is." My father said finally, "You've always had us. You've never done anything alone." My mother added softly, "If you leave, don't expect us to fix it when it fails." There it was, not concern. Not guidance, a condition. Love attached to obedience. I felt something crack inside me, but I smiled anyway. That's what I had always done. Smiled to keep peace. Smiled to stay the good daughter. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," I said quietly. My brother laughed under his breath. "She'll be back in 6 months." I looked at my father, hoping just once for a flicker of belief. Instead, he said it. "You'll never survive without us." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. Heavy with years of doubt, disguised as protection. Heavy with the belief that I was too soft for the real world. In that moment, I realized something painful. They didn't see me. Not really. They saw who they needed me to be. The reliable daughter, the compliant one, the safe investment, but not the woman sitting in front of them. I went to my room that night and cried silently, not because they refused to support me financially. I wasn't asking for money. I cried because I understood for the first time that their faith in me had limits. And those limits were smaller than my dreams. The next morning, I packed quietly. No dramatic announcement. No slammed doors, just folded clothes and steady breathing. My mother stood in the hallway, watching. "You're being stubborn," she said. Maybe I was, or maybe I was just tired of shrinking. "I'll be okay." I told her gently. She didn't hug me. My father stayed in the living room. When I rolled my suitcase toward the door, He didn't look up from the television. "You'll never survive without us," he repeated almost casually. I paused. For a second, I almost believed him. Because they had been my whole world, my safety, my identity, but something inside me, small, fragile, but steady, whispered, "You deserve to try." So I opened the door. The air outside felt different, colder, wider, scary. I stepped out with nothing but savings that would last 6 months and a plan that no one believed in. As the door closed behind me, I realized something quietly devastating. They weren't afraid I would fail. They were afraid I might succeed without them, and that thought hurt more than the doubt, but I kept walking anyway. The first night alone was the loudest night of my life, not because of noise, because of silence. I rented a small studio apartment on the edge of the city. The paint was slightly chipped near the window. The kitchen light flickered if I switched it on too quickly. The mattress was thinner than I expected, but it was mine. No one questioned why I was there. No one told me what was practical. No one measured my choices against their fears. And yet, as I sat on the floor eating instant noodles from a paper cup, I felt something I hadn't prepared for. Grief, not for the house, not for comfort, for the version of my family I had believed in. I kept checking my phone that first week, half expecting a message that said, "We were wrong, come back. We believe in you." Instead, there was silence. Then, 3 days later, a text from my mother. "Have you found a job yet? Not how are you? Not are you safe?" A job. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I'm working on my company." There was no response. That silence felt heavier than any argument. I began setting up my business slowly. I worked from a small desk facing the window. In the mornings, sunlight spilled across my laptop screen, and for a few quiet hours, I felt calm, focused. Capable, I contacted the local businesses who had once shown interest. Some hesitated. A few declined politely. But 2 agreed to give me a chance, too. It wasn't much, but it was real. Every small success felt fragile, like glass I was afraid to drop. I double-checked everything. I worked late into the night. I saved every receipt. I tracked every expense. Fear became my silent partner, not fear of failure, fear of proving them right when things went wrong, and they did. I didn't call home. When I miscalculated a budget and had to skip groceries for a week, I didn't tell anyone. When a client delayed payment and my rent felt like a mountain, I swallowed the anxiety quietly. Because going back wasn't just moving back home. It was confirming their version of me. Weak, emotional. Dependent. One evening about 2 months in, my brother called unexpectedly. So, he said casually, "How's the little experiment?" Little experiment. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "It's growing." He chuckled. "Dad says you'll come back once reality hits." Reality had already hit. It just looked different than they imagined. "I'm okay," I said softly. There was a pause. Then he added almost carelessly, "You know, we would have helped if you just listened." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Help. Their help always came with direction. With control, with conditions, I began to see something I hadn't seen before. Their support had never been about my growth. It had been about proximity. They were comfortable when I was near, when my success or failure was within their reach. Distance unsettled them, and that realization didn't make me angry. It made me quiet. Around month 4, my savings were nearly gone. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, staring at spreadsheets that refused to balance. My hands were cold. My chest felt tight. For the first time, doubt whispered loudly, maybe they were right. I picked up my phone. I even opened my father's contact, but I didn't press call. Instead, I looked around my small apartment. The chipped paint, the flickering light, the desk by the window. This space had witnessed every late night. Every tear I wiped before a client meeting. Every invoice sent with shaking hands. This wasn't failure. This was becoming, so I put the phone down. The next morning, something shifted, not externally, internally. I stopped trying to prove them wrong and started trying to build something right. I refined my services. I reached out to new clients. I attended networking events alone, even when my voice trembled during introductions. I learned to negotiate, to say no, to set terms. Slowly, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't as fragile as they thought. I wasn't even as fragile as I thought. Months passed. The calls from home became infrequent. When we did speak, conversations were surface level. How's work? Fine. Are you managing? Yes. No one asked what it cost me emotionally. No one asked how lonely it felt some nights. But I stopped waiting for those questions, because something quiet was growing inside me, not resentment. Independence, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't need applause. One afternoon, as I signed my 5th client contract, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not excitement, not relief, clarity. They had believed I couldn't survive without them, but survival was never the goal. Becoming was, and becoming doesn't happen loudly. It happens in small apartments, in unpaid invoices, in unanswered texts, in the decision not to go back. I didn't leave my family with anger. I left with hope. And slowly, through silence and time, hope was turning into strength. Success did not arrive with applause. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. By the end of the first year, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was stabilizing. There's a difference. Surviving feels like holding your breath underwater. Stabilizing feels like learning how to float. My client list grew slowly, not dramatically, not in a way that would impress anyone at a family dinner, but steadily enough that my rent was no longer terrifying, steadily enough that I could replace the flickering kitchen light without calculating the cost 3 times. I moved into a slightly bigger apartment during my 2nd year, still modest, still simple, but this time I bought a real desk, a sturdy one. I remember running my hand across its smooth wooden surface and feeling something unexpected. Pride, not the loud kind, not the kind that demands validation, the quiet kind that says, I did this without collapsing. I rarely spoke to my family by then, not because we had fought. There were no dramatic arguments, just distance that stretched naturally when neither side reached to shorten it. Sometimes my mother would send photos from family gatherings, birthdays, anniversaries, my brother's promotion dinner. You're missed, she'd write, but I noticed something. They never asked about my work anymore. At first, I thought it was disinterest. Later, I realized it was discomfort, because asking would mean acknowledging that I hadn't failed, and silence for them was easier. By the middle of the 2nd year, I hired my first employee. Her name was Sana, fresh out of university. Nervous, eager, she reminded me of myself, soft-spoken, careful with her words. The day I handed her the office keys, yes, by then we had a small office. I saw her hands trembling slightly. Are you sure I'm ready? She asked. I smiled. Yes, I said gently. You are. And as I said it, something shifted inside me. I was giving her the belief I had once searched for. The office wasn't glamorous, just 3 rooms on the 3rd floor of a quiet commercial building. Cream walls, large windows, second-hand chairs. But when I stood in the center of that space for the first time, I felt the weight of every night I had doubted myself. Every almost phone, call home, every tear I wiped before meetings. The growth wasn't explosive. It was layered. Client by client, lesson by lesson, I learned how to read contracts carefully, how to detect hesitation in a potential partner's voice, how to walk away from deals that didn't align with my values, and slowly, something deeper changed. I stopped needing to be right. I stopped replaying my father's words in my head. You'll never survive without us. The sentence no longer hurt. It felt outdated. By the 3rd year, we had expanded. 5 employees, a growing reputation, referrals coming in without me chasing them. One afternoon, I stood outside a construction site, watching workers install our company's name on the glass exterior of a newly purchased building. Our headquarters. The word felt too big at first, too ambitious, but it wasn't about size, it was about permanence. As the letters were lifted into place, shining against the sunlight, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Not triumph, release. I wasn't building to prove anything anymore. I was building because I had become capable. There's a difference between ambition fueled by anger and ambition fueled by clarity. Mine had shifted. Around that time, my brother called again after months of silence. I heard from someone that your business is doing okay. He said, carefully. I noticed the change in tone. No laughter. No smirk I could hear through the phone. It's growing. I replied calmly. There was a pause. That's good. He said, Dad mentioned you seem busy. Seem busy, as if my life were still a rumor. We spoke politely, carefully, like strangers trying to remember shared history. After the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt distant, not emotionally cold, just aware. I understood something now that I hadn't understood 3 years ago. Their doubt had never truly been about my capability. It had been about their comfort. My independence forced them to confront something unsettling, that I could exist fully without their structure. And that realization is hard for some families, especially when love has always been tied to control. A week before our headquarters officially opened, I received a message from my mother. We were driving in the city today. It read, Is that your company building near the highway? I stared at the screen, so they had seen it, the glass walls. The bold letters, the name they once dismissed as unrealistic. I typed slowly, Yes, it is. Minutes passed before the next message arrived. No congratulations, no apology, just, oh. Sometimes silence says more than arguments ever could. And for the first time, I didn't need anything else from them. Because I had already given myself what they couldn't, permission to grow without approval, permission to succeed without applause, permission to exist without shrinking. As I stood in the lobby of our new headquarters the next morning, sunlight flooding through the glass, I placed my hand against the cool wall and took a steady breath. 3 years ago, I walked out with one suitcase and fragile hope. Now, I stood inside something solid. Not just a building, myself. They didn't plan to see it. That's what my mother told me later. They were driving back from a wedding in the city. My father in the passenger seat, my brother driving. Traffic was slow near the highway exit, and that's when it appeared, glass reflecting late afternoon sunlight. My company's name stretched boldly across the front. My name wasn't on the building, but it was in every decision that built it. They recognized it immediately, not because they had followed my journey, but because they remembered the name from 3 years ago. The emotional idea placed gently on the dining table. The idea they never opened. My mother said the car grew quiet. No one joked, no one minimized, no one said, she'll be back in 6 months. They just looked and kept driving. She called me that evening. Her voice sounded different, softer but uncertain, as if she were stepping into a room she didn't fully understand. We passed your building today, she said. I was sitting in my office at the time, reviewing quarterly reports. The same kind of documents they once believed I wasn't capable of understanding. Yes, I replied calmly. We moved in last week. Another pause. It's big. There was something fragile in the way she said it. Not pride, not exactly regret, recognition. My father didn't come to the phone. He didn't need to. His silence had already spoken. Over the next few weeks, small changes happened. My brother sent a message asking for advice about a side project he was considering. My mother asked how many employees we had now. My father, indirectly through her, asked if business was stable. They were careful with their words, careful not to mention the past, careful not to admit they had been wrong. And I realized something surprising. I didn't need them to. 3 years earlier, I thought success would feel like standing on a stage, proving something. Instead, it felt like sitting quietly in my office at sunset, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Peaceful, complete, one Sunday afternoon, I decided to invite them to visit, not as a statement, not as revenge. Just as an open door, they arrived dressed slightly more formal than necessary. My mother carried a small box of sweets as if attending a ceremony. My brother looked around the lobby with cautious curiosity. My father walked slowly, observing everything without speaking. I greeted them gently. No tension, no performance, just calm. As I showed them the conference room, the open workspace, the framed certificates on the wall, I noticed the shift in their expressions. Not envy, perspective. This wasn't a little experiment. It wasn't rebellion. It was discipline. It was risk. It was growth. We sat in my office at the end of the tour, the same office where I had once stared at spreadsheets in fear, only now larger, steadier. My father finally spoke. You did this alone. The question wasn't accusatory. It was careful. I met his eyes. I built it. I said softly, but I wasn't alone. I learned from everyone, including you. It was true. I had learned resilience from their doubt, structure from their strictness, financial caution from their warnings. Pain can teach even when it isn't kind. He nodded slowly. I didn't think. He paused, searching for words he wasn't used to saying. I didn't think it would work. I could have reminded him of his exact sentence. You'll never survive without us. But I didn't, because this moment wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about closure, I know. I replied gently, and in that I know. There was no bitterness, only understanding. Families don't always know how to separate love from control. Sometimes fear dresses itself as protection. Sometimes doubt sounds like advice. They had believed they were keeping me safe. They didn't realize they were keeping me small. As they prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. Longer than usual. We worried about you, she whispered, I know. I said again, but I also knew something else now. Worry is not the same as belief. After they left, I stood alone in the lobby for a moment. The building was quiet. Employees had gone home. The glass walls reflected the evening sky. 3 years ago, I walked out of their house feeling fragile. Today, I stood grounded, not because they finally saw me, but because I had seen myself. Success didn't repair everything. It didn't erase the hurt, but it created space where I no longer needed permission to exist fully. And that was enough. The truth is, I didn't leave to prove them wrong. I left to find out who I was without their limits. What I found was not a fearless woman, but a steady one. Boundaries are not walls built out of anger. They are doors you choose when to open. I still speak to my family. We are polite. We are learning each other again, slowly as adults. But I no longer shrink to fit their comfort, because love without respect feels like doubt, and respect begins quietly, with yourself. They once said I would never survive without them. They were wrong. But more importantly, I survived without losing my softness. And that is the real success.